AMD has just released an update on their work with Sony in creating the next-gen PlayStation. Unfortunately for gamers and hardware enthusiasts, the focus of the console will be AI upscaling and fake frames, instead of traditional rasterization and improved image fidelity. That's right, now it's not only PC gamers that get scammed with lazy rendering shortcuts. Console gamers get that privilege also. Let's dive into what AMD and Sony are working on. Maybe we can find some positive signs among all the terribleness. Today's sponsor, VIP urcdkey.com, are having a Halloween big sale. If you buy a Windows license directly from Microsoft, you'll end up paying hundreds of dollars. But if instead you get an official OEM Windows license from a provider like VIP urcdkey, you'll only have to spend $23 when you use my coupon code C25 for 25% off. These keys work globally and you'll get them within minutes. You can pay with PayPal or with your credit card. After you purchase your key, go to your purchased orders page, copy your key, and in Windows type in the search activate and paste your key into the appropriate field and click activate. It's that easy. Your Windows is now activated. You can also get Office 2021 Professional for less than $100 when you use my coupon code C25. Check the links in the description for your cheap OEM Windows and Office keys at vipurcdkey.com. So Mark Cerny, Sony's lead system architect for the PlayStation, and AMD's Jack Huyen got together in a video on AMD's and PlayStation's official YouTube channels to talk about the future of PlayStation. If you don't remember who Jack Huyen is, he's that guy who said AMD was going to focus on the 80% TAM this generation so that gamers could have affordable GPUs, but then released a 70 class card for $700 plus, and that was after announcing the MSRP of the card at $600, which would not have been an 80% TAM price point to begin with. Yep, that's the marketing mastermind behind the AIBS that's now being sold to console enthusiasts. So anyway, the pair of engineers discussed how the next PlayStation will be all about neural assisted rendering, or as it's better known among savvy gamers, fake frames. As most of you in my audience probably know already, this is the new paradigm in graphics rendering, where instead of rendering actual frames, a machine learning algorithm uses a trained model to predict what future frames should look like, and then AI is used to generate them, approximating the real thing. This materializes in two rendering techniques. One is upscaling and the other is what NVIDIA calls frame gen. Upscaling, like FSR and DLSS, turns a lower resolution frame into a frame that matches the screen you are using. In the case of a console, that would probably be a 4K TV or a 1080p projector. This means the GPU can output more frames at a lower effective resolution, so you get smoother gameplay in exchange for a lower quality image. And that's the key problem. Even in the highest quality DLSS and FSR settings, you can tell the difference between an upscale image and native resolution. I've tested this myself with the RTX 5090, and the difference is definitely noticeable. Don't believe the marketing hype out there. Even the latest implementation of DLSS looks blurry compared to native. If you are gaming on a small screen, the difference will be less noticeable, but on a large TV, you can be sure you'll be able to tell the difference, especially if you're used to native 4K. As for frame gen, it does exactly what the name implies. It generates fake frames with AI, so only a handful of frames are actually rendered. The rest will be AI generated. So what is the problem with these approaches, you might ask? Firstly, as we've seen with NVIDIA's frame generation implementation, and by the way, NVIDIA are the ones who invented all this stuff, AMD is just copying it and calling it innovation. To generate AI frames, the game has to drop down to very low frame rates. This recent video by Vex on YouTube shows how a game like Cyberpunk that is using frame gen times 4 to display 176 frames is actually only running at a measly 44 frames per second, so it's dropping from native 63 FPS to actual 44 FPS just to display more generated frames, making the game feel sluggish and laggy urcdkey, with higher frame rate but lower performance. The latency penalty is obviously significant. With most GPUs, it's worse than just turning FrameGen off, even if the resulting image appears smoother with it on. Games are not movies or TV series where the user is not interacting with the media. Controlling what is happening on screen is integral to gaming, and unless you are playing a visual novel, having snappy controls and low latency is fundamental for a good gaming experience. Actual frames are used to determine collision detection for models and projectiles. For instance, when you are playing a shooter, if you shoot at something that is part of an AI-generated frame, you might be shooting at something that's not actually there, just to give you an example of the problems with FrameGen. Secondly, like I said earlier, upscaling isn't free. There is a noticeable drop in image quality. These techniques were invented so that hardware companies can stay on older process nodes and keep their costs down, while increasing the prices of hardware for the final consumer, and so that they can sell mid-range hardware labeled as high-end hardware, because after all, if a GPU can display 200 frames per second in AAA games, it can't possibly be low-end, right? It's marketing gold. Consumers get big numbers on the box and on screen, and Nvidia and AMD can sell low-end hardware at mid-range prices, and mid-range hardware at high-end prices. And now it's time for the consoles to go the same route. Now, the big highlight feature of like 5 years ago, so half a decade ago, was real-time ray tracing. Till this day, no one really cares about RT, but it seems that Sony and AMD are going all in with fixed function blocks dedicated to ray tracing and path tracing. AMD announced that it will be introducing neural arrays into their future GPU microarchitecture, so this isn't exclusive to the PS6. Mark Cerny says that the current approach for real-time ray tracing has reached its limit, so AMD is introducing new hardware blocks called Radiance cores, which will work alongside the already announced Radiance cache to essentially perform real-time ray tracing workloads without having to use the CPU for ray traversal. On paper, this seems interesting. Having hardware exclusively dedicated to ray traversal is a good thing, right? Well, you see, using fixed function hardware like this requires developer implementation, and if there's one thing we've seen in the past few years is that game developers can't be bothered to implement even the most basic optimizations, let alone waste their time with proprietary tech. That's precious time that can be used to create more in-game monetizable content. Even Battlefield 6, a huge AAA game, will not have real-time ray tracing, seeing as the developers want to prioritize their resources into optimizing for a wider range of hardware. If big studios are not prioritizing proprietary hardware blocks, do you really think smaller studios will? After 5 years, no one is bothering with real-time ray tracing, seeing as it adds nothing to the final image that's worth the performance hit. Yet Sony and AMD think that adding dark silicon to the chip is worth it, and the few times the Radiance cores will actually be used, the game will still need to use FSR and FrameGen to avoid looking like a slideshow. Gamers playing Borderlands 4 on the Xbox found out the hard way what the state of modern game development is in, with the game dropping down to 0 frames per second due to a complete lack of optimization, and that's on a console where developers supposedly dedicate more resources to optimize for the hardware, seeing as it's a known quantity. So basically what will happen is game devs will make games for the PS6 with unoptimized assets that saturate the system's bandwidth, dropping the performance down to a crawl, but then use frame generation and upscaling to compensate for the terrible optimization. AMD seems to be anticipating this problem and is introducing further asset compression into their rendering pipeline. It's like a band-aid on top of a band-aid. From a game developer's perspective, as long as the game hits 30 FPS, which is often the standard on consoles, they'll be happy to ship unoptimized craptastic game experiences to gamers, like we saw with Borderlands, to give a recent example. And a game running at 30 FPS upscaled with FrameGen will effectively be running at 20 FPS. This strategy for the PS6 has failure written all over it. This AI-first approach from AMD and Sony not only fully embraces modern game dev laziness, it validates it. This is an executive's dream come true. They can fire even more game devs and rely on these shortcuts to sell barely functioning games, but still claim big performance numbers thanks to things like FrameGen. AMD and Sony get to increase their margins also, seeing as they can produce the PlayStation 6 with inferior hardware than they otherwise would have if traditional traditional rendering was the focus. Everyone wins. Well, everyone except for gamers. Sony and Huiyin ended the video essentially confirming that the PS6 is years away. In fact, it's not even real hardware at this point, and that these technologies will be coming also to AMD's other hardware, meaning to their future APUs and GPUs. So it's not just console gamers who will get to experience upscaled, laggy, fake frames for years to come. The fact that they are making these apologetic videos at this point, when the console isn't even in prototype form, makes me think that they are trying to ease gamers into this new paradigm where everything is fake. Even though the console is years away, AMD and Sony are using the boiled frog strategy to cook gamers into accepting all of this over time. As far as I'm concerned, upscaling should be used exclusively in low-power portable devices. That's where the tech can be useful, not in full-size consoles for the living room or on the PC. And frame gen is not a technology that has a home in games, which are interactive by nature and need to be responsive. I'm not a console guy, so I'm not here dissing on the PlayStation platform. It's the ethos that I find troubling for all gamers, not just PlayStation fans. The PS6 might be years away, but it's already looking like a scam, and the next Xbox will go the same way. Gamers need to be vocal about this and demand better hardware from these companies while the consoles are still in the design phase. Game visuals and image fidelity need to be improving, not declining. Games need to feel more responsive, not more laggy. Let me know in the comments what you think about this nonsense from Sony and AMD, and if you enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe and leave the video a like. Thanks for watching, and until the next one.